The rain hammered against the windows of the sprawling Lagos mansion as 19-year-old Adunni carefully arranged the imported flowers in a crystal vase. Her stepmother, Folklore, watched from the marble staircase with calculating eyes, her designer dress flowing like liquid silk around her perfectly manicured form. "Make sure those roses are perfect, dear." Folklare's voice dripped with false sweetness. "The Adebayo family will be here soon for dinner, and we can't have them thinking we're anything less than flawless." Adunni's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the flowers. It had been 3 years since her father, Chief Oyamide, had married Folklore, and in that time, her life had transformed from fairy tale to nightmare. What started as small criticisms had evolved into constant psychological warfare, always carefully hidden behind closed doors. Her father's textile empire had made him one of the wealthiest men in West Africa, and Folklore had positioned herself as the perfect wife. To the outside world, she was charitable, elegant, and devoted to her stepdaughter. But behind the mansion's walls, she was systematically isolating Adunni from her father and the family business. "Your father asked me to review the quarterly reports with you," Folklore continued, descending the stairs with predatory grace. "He's concerned about your capabilities in handling business matters." Adunni's heart sank. Those reports were her lifeline to her father's world, her proof that she was ready to inherit the textile empire he had built. She had spent months preparing detailed analyses, cost-saving strategies, and expansion plans that could revolutionize their operations. "I've been working on those for weeks," Adunni replied carefully. "I have some innovative ideas about expanding into sustainable fabrics that could—" "Sweet child," Folklore interrupted, her smile sharp as a blade. "Your father thinks you need more guidance before you're ready for such responsibilities. Perhaps you should focus on finding a suitable husband instead." The words hit like physical blows. Adunni had graduated top of her class in business administration, had spent summers learning every aspect of their textile operations, and had dreams of modernizing the company while maintaining its traditional roots. But Folklore was systematically undermining her credibility with her father. That evening, during dinner with the Adebayo family, Adunni watched helplessly as Folklore painted a picture of a frivolous stepdaughter more interested in parties than business. Chief Adebayo's son, Colonel, was being positioned as a potential business partner and suitor, a man who would effectively take over Adunni's inheritance through marriage. "Adunni is still so young," Folklore laughed melodiously. "She needs time to mature before handling serious responsibilities. Perhaps a strong husband to guide her will be the perfect solution." After the guests left, Adunni confronted her stepmother in the study where her father's portrait watched over stacks of business documents. "Why are you doing this? What have I ever done to you?" Folklare's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Your existence is what you've done, dear. As long as you're alive and unmarried, you're an obstacle to my plans. Your father built this empire, and it deserves to be in capable hands." "My hands are capable." Adunni's voice rose with desperation. "I know this business better than anyone." "You know what your father taught you," Folklore hissed. "But I know what he doesn't tell you. About the debts, the failing contracts, the competitors circling like vultures. This empire needs someone strong enough to make the hard decisions, not a naive girl playing with fabric samples." The revelation that the family business was in trouble sent shock waves through Adunni's world. Everything she thought she knew was crumbling, and worse. Folklore was positioning herself as a solution to problems Adunni didn't even know existed. Over the following weeks, Adunni discovered that Folklore had been intercepting communications, redirecting business meetings, and slowly convincing her father that his daughter wasn't ready for leadership. Documents went missing, meetings were rescheduled without her knowledge, and gradually, she found herself excluded from the inner workings of her own inheritance. The final blow came when she overheard Folklore on a phone call, speaking in hushed tones about eliminating obstacles and ensuring the business survives. The word sent chills down Adunni's spine as she realized just how far her stepmother was willing to go. That night, as Lagos slept under a blanket of humid darkness, Adunni made a decision that would change everything. She would gather evidence of Folklare's manipulation and present it to her father. She would fight for her inheritance and expose the woman who had wormed her way into their family. But Folake had been planning her next move for months, and Adunni had no idea that her stepmother's definition of eliminating obstacles was far more sinister than she could have imagined. What do you think Folake's ultimate plan is? Drop your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to take a dark turn that will leave you speechless. Click the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. The Lagos humidity clung to Adunni's skin as she crept through the mansion's corridors at midnight, her bare feet silent on the imported marble floors. Her stepmother's office was her destination, the locked room where Folake conducted her mysterious phone calls and kept files that were supposedly too complex for Adunni to understand. Using the lockpicking skills her childhood friend had taught her during their teenage adventures, Adunni carefully worked the door open. The office smelled of expensive perfume and something else, something that reminded her of the fear she'd been carrying for months. What she found inside made her blood freeze. Folders labeled with the names of competitors contained detailed information about their business strategies, almost as if someone had been feeding information to rival companies. Financial documents showed money transfers to accounts she didn't recognize, and most damning of all, draft emails to her father suggesting that Adunni was having secret meetings with business rivals. Her hands shook as she photographed page after page with her phone. Folake wasn't just manipulating the family dynamics. She was systematically destroying the business from within while positioning herself as a solution. The failing contracts weren't coincidental. They were sabotage. A sound in the hallway made Adunni's heart pound. She quickly gathered the documents, returned them to their folders, and slipped out to the balcony door just as footsteps approached the office. From her hiding spot in the garden, she watched Folake enter the room and immediately noticed that something was different. The next morning brought confirmation of Adunni's worst fears. At breakfast, her father announced that he would be traveling to Abuja for emergency business meetings. Meetings that Folake had arranged to save the company from mysterious threats that only she seemed to understand. "While I'm gone," Chief Alumide said, his weathered face showing the strain of recent months, "Folake will handle all business communications. She's proven herself invaluable in protecting our interests." Adunni tried to catch her father's eye, desperate to share what she discovered, but Folake smoothly redirected the conversation to plans for Adunni's engagement to Colonel Adebayo. The web of control was tightening with suffocating precision. That afternoon, while Folake attended a charity luncheon, Adunni made copies of the evidence and hid them in multiple locations. She also reached out to her father's most trusted business partner, Uncle Biodun, hoping to find an ally who could help her expose the truth. But Folake's network of informants was more extensive than Adunni had realized. Within hours of her meeting with Uncle Biodun, she received a text message that made her blood run cold. "Some conversations should remain private. Meet me at Victoria Island Beach at sunset. Come alone." As the sun began its descent over Lagos, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Adunni stood on the isolated stretch of beach where she'd received countless childhood lessons about swimming and water safety from her late mother. The irony wasn't lost on her that this place of happy memories had become the setting for her growing nightmare. Folake arrived precisely at sunset, her silhouette elegant against a dramatic sky. But there was something different about her demeanor, a cold finality that sent survival instincts screaming through Adunni's mind. "You've been very busy today," Folake said, her voice carrying easily over the sound of waves. "Meeting with Uncle Biodun, taking photographs, playing detective. Did you really think I wouldn't know?" "I have evidence of everything you've done," Adunni replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The sabotage, the manipulation, all of it. My father will believe me when he sees proof." Folake laughed. "The sound is beautiful and chilling as a siren's call. Your father believes what I tell him to believe. But you're right about one thing. Evidence can be very powerful. That's why I've spent months creating evidence of your own betrayal." She pulled out a tablet and showed Adunni bank records, email chains, and photographs that painted a picture of a treacherous daughter selling family secrets to competitors. The fabricated evidence was masterful, complete with forged signatures and timestamps that would fool anyone who didn't know the truth. "You're insane," Adunni whispered, backing toward the water's edge. "Why would you destroy everything my father built?" "I'm not destroying it," Folake replied, advancing with predatory calm. I'm inheriting it. Your father will leave everything to his beloved wife if his daughter proves unworthy or unavailable. And after the night, you'll be very unavailable. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. This had never been about control or manipulation. It had been about murder from the very beginning. Folake had married her father specifically to inherit his empire, and Adunni was the only obstacle standing in her way. People will look for me, Adunni said, continuing to back away as waves lapped at her ankles. My father will know something happened. Your father will receive a heartbroken call from me explaining how you took your own life rather than face the shame of your betrayal being exposed, Folake said, producing a farewell letter written in handwriting that perfectly mimicked Adunni's own. The evidence of your treachery will be discovered after your tragic death, confirming my worst fears about your mental state. As Folake reached into her purse and withdrew something that glinted in the fading light, Adunni realized that her stepmother had planned every detail of this moment. The isolated location, the perfect timing, even the weather conditions that would wash away evidence. Nothing had been left to chance. The fight that followed was brief but desperate, ending when Adunni felt herself falling backward into the dark waters of Lagos Lagoon, her stepmother's triumphant smile the last thing she saw before the current pulled her under. But Folake had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the swimming lessons that had made Adunni as comfortable in water as on land. Did Folake just make the biggest mistake of her life? What do you think happens when you underestimate someone's survival skills? Smash that like button if you're as shocked as I am, and subscribe because you absolutely need to see how this story unfolds. The next chapter will blow your mind. The icy waters of Lagos Lagoon embraced Adunni like a cold grave, but instead of surrendering to darkness, she let the current carry her away from the beach where Folake waited to confirm her death. Years of swimming lessons and her mother's stories about surviving in rough waters had prepared her for this moment, though she had never imagined her life would depend on those skills. Fighting against the undertow that threatened to drag her to the bottom, Adunni surfaced quietly nearly a kilometer from where she'd fallen. Through the darkness, she could see the distant lights of Victoria Island and the faint glow of a flashlight as Folake searched the shoreline for her body. She swam to a cluster of fishing boats anchored in a small cove, pulling herself onto one of the vessels just as her strength began to fail. The elderly fisherman who found her at dawn, shivering and barely conscious, would later tell people that she looked like a ghost rising from the water, which, in many ways, she was. Papa Emeka, the fisherman, asked no questions when she begged him not to report finding her. Something in her eyes told him this was a woman running from death itself, and his decades of life had taught him that sometimes the authorities weren't the answer to every problem. For 3 weeks, Adunni recovered in Papa Emeka's modest home in a fishing village outside Lagos, healing not just from her physical ordeal, but from the psychological trauma of realizing that someone she trusted had tried to murder her. During those weeks, she watched the news coverage of her own death with growing rage and determination. Folake's performance as the grieving stepmother was Academy Award worthy. She sobbed beautifully during interviews, spoke movingly about Adunni's struggles with depression and family pressure, and revealed the fabricated evidence of betrayal with perfect timing. The business community rallied around the widow who had been so cruelly deceived by her stepdaughter's treachery. Within a month, Folake had consolidated control of the textile empire, married Colonel Adebayo in what was described as a healing union between grieving families, and begun implementing changes that would increase profits while eliminating her husband's charitable foundations. She was, by all appearances, the perfect widow building something beautiful from tragedy. But Adunni was learning patience in her seaside sanctuary. Papa Emeka's granddaughter, Kemi, was a cybersecurity expert who taught her how to research from the shadows, how to track financial movements, and how to build digital evidence without leaving traces. The fishing village became her university for understanding the darker side of business and human nature. Over the following months, Adunni discovered the full scope of Folake's network. Her stepmother wasn't working alone. She was part of a sophisticated group that specialized in marrying into wealthy families, eliminating obstacles, and claiming inheritances. Chief Alyamide had been their largest target yet, but he wasn't their first victim. The revelation that her father had also been poisoned, slowly and carefully over months to make his death appear natural, sent Adunni into a fury that burned hotter than Lego sunshine. Folklore hadn't just stolen her inheritance. She had murdered her father and then tried to kill her when she became an obstacle to the plan. For 10 years, Adunni built her strength, her knowledge, and her network. She earned a new identity as Nneka Okafor, became a successful businesswoman specializing in textile imports, and carefully positioned herself within the same social circles where Folklore now moved as one of Lagos' most eligible widows. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had become everything Folklore claimed she could never be: a shrewd businesswoman, a strategic thinker, and someone capable of playing the long game with deadly precision. The frightened 19-year-old who had fallen into the lagoon had died in those waters. The woman who emerged was something far more dangerous. By year 8 of her secret existence, Adunni had acquired properties, built business relationships, and established herself as a legitimate player in Nigeria's textile industry. More importantly, she had documented every detail of Folklore's criminal network, tracked their financial movements, and identified their next targets. The final pieces of her plan fell into place when she learned that Folklore was preparing to eliminate another obstacle: Kunnel's younger brother, who was asking too many questions about their father's business dealings. History was about to repeat itself, and Adunni realized that she wasn't just seeking revenge for herself anymore. She was trying to prevent future murders. On a humid Lagos evening, exactly 10 years after her supposed death, Adunni walked into the grand ballroom of the Lagos Oriental Hotel, where Folklore was hosting a charity gala. She had chosen this moment carefully, a public event filled with witnesses, celebrating, ironically enough, a foundation for protecting vulnerable young women. The transformation was so complete that it took several minutes for recognition to dawn in Folklore's eyes. The teenager who had fought desperately on a dark beach had become an elegant, confident woman whose presence commanded attention from everyone in the room. When her eyes finally met across the crowded ballroom, Folklore's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor like the illusion of security she had built over the past decade. The dead had returned, and they had learned how to fight. The moment of truth has arrived. Can you imagine Folklore's shock at seeing someone she thought was dead? Hit that like button if you felt that chill down your spine, and make sure you're subscribed because the confrontation in the next chapter will be absolutely explosive. What do you think Adunni's first move will be? The charity gala continued around them, but for Folklore and Adunni, the world had narrowed to just the space between their locked gazes. Lagos society's elite chatted and laughed, completely unaware that they were witnessing the first move in a deadly game that had been 10 years in the making. Folklore recovered quickly, her survival instincts sharp as ever. She excused herself from her conversation and glided across the ballroom with the same predatory grace that Adunni remembered from her childhood nightmares. But this time, the dynamics had shifted completely. Nneka Okafor, Folklore said smoothly, using Adunni's assumed name as they stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lagos Harbor. What an unexpected pleasure. I feel like we met before. I'm sure you do, Adunni replied, her voice steady and controlled. I have that kind of face. Familiar, like someone from your past who refuses to stay buried. The words hit their target. Folklore's composure cracked just enough for Adunni to see the fear flickering behind her eyes. This was no longer the terrified teenager she had pushed into dark waters. This was a woman who had spent a decade preparing for this exact moment. You look well, Folklore continued, probing for information. Your business has been quite successful, I hear. Textile imports, isn't it? Interesting choice of industry. Family business, Adunni replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know how these things run in the blood, particularly when someone has unfinished family business to attend to. Over the next hour, they engaged in a careful dance of words, each probing the other's defenses while maintaining the facade of polite social interaction. But Adunni held all the advantages now. She knew Folklore's secrets, her methods, and most importantly, her weaknesses. The first crack in Folklore's armor came when Adunni casually mentioned her concerns about the safety of young entrepreneurs in Lagos. It's tragic how many promising business heirs have died in accidents over the past decade, she said, watching Folklore's reaction carefully. Drowning seems to be particularly common. Life can be unpredictable, Folklore replied, but her voice had developed a slight tremor. Water safety is so important, especially for young people who might be overwhelmed by family pressures. Absolutely, Adunni agreed, though I've always found that swimming lessons from a young age can be life-saving. You never know when someone might need to survive an unexpected fall into deep water. The message was clear. I survived your murder attempt, and I've been preparing for this reunion. Folake excused herself soon after, claiming a sudden headache. But Adunni knew the real reason for her departure. Her stepmother needed time to process the impossible reality that her perfect crime had failed. Over the following weeks, Adunni began implementing the psychological warfare tactics she had learned during her decade in exile. Anonymous packages arrived at Folake's penthouse containing newspaper clippings about her late stepdaughter, with certain words highlighted in red ink. Security cameras captured footage of a woman who looked remarkably like a grown-up Adunni walking past Folake's office building at precisely the times when she would be leaving for lunch. The mental pressure was deliberate and calculated. Folake had been comfortable for 10 years, secure in the knowledge that her crime was perfect and undetectable. Now she was living with the constant fear that her victim was not only alive, but actively hunting her. But Adunni's real masterstroke came when she began targeting Folake's criminal network. Using the information she had gathered over the years, she started anonymously tipping off authorities about financial irregularities, unexplained deaths, and suspicious marriage patterns. One by one, Folake's associates found themselves under investigation, or worse. The pressure reached its breaking point when Cunnell's younger brother, Segan, approached Adunni at a business conference. He had been conducting his own investigation into his family's sudden wealth and had discovered financial records that didn't add up. "I think someone killed my father," Segan confided during their private meeting. "And I think they're planning to kill me too. My brother won't listen. He's completely under his wife's influence. But I found evidence of money transfers, forged documents, everything." Adunni realized that Folake's next murder was imminent. Her stepmother had built her entire life around eliminating witnesses and obstacles, and Segan's investigation posed an existential threat to her carefully constructed empire. "What would you say if I told you that your suspicions are correct?" Adunni asked carefully. "And that the person you suspect has done this before to other families?" Segan's eyes widened as the implications hit him. "You know who it is." "I know exactly who it is," Adunni confirmed. "And I know how to prove it. But it means trusting me with your life, because once we move against her, there won't be any going back." That night, they began recording Segan's conversations with Folake, using wire technology that Kemi had taught Adunni to use. The recordings captured Folake's increasingly desperate attempts to convince Segan to take a relaxing vacation to a remote location where accidents could happen more easily. But Folake was also preparing her own countermove. She had hired private investigators to research Nneka Okafor's background, and they were getting dangerously close to discovering the truth about Adunni's identity. The hunter was being hunted, and time was running out for both women. The final confrontation came sooner than expected when Folake's investigators delivered photographic evidence, proving that Nneka Okafor and Adunni were the same person. Armed with this knowledge, Folake made a decision that would prove to be her greatest mistake. She decided to finish what she had started 10 years ago on a dark beach. But this time, she would make sure there were no witnesses to survive. The tables have turned completely. Folake thinks she's setting a trap, but has she just walked into one instead? The final showdown is coming, and you do not want to miss it. Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because the next chapter will have you on the edge of your seat. What do you think Adunni's endgame really is? The message came through encrypted channels that Folake thought only she controlled. "Meet me at Victoria Island Beach. Midnight. Come alone or I expose everything." She smiled as she read it, believing that desperation had finally driven her supposedly dead stepdaughter into making a fatal mistake. What Folake didn't know was that Adunni had spent 10 years learning every aspect of her stepmother's operation, including her communication networks, her hired muscle, and her preferred methods of eliminating problems. The beach meeting was indeed a trap, just not the one Folake thought she was setting. As Folake arrived at the isolated stretch of sand where she had killed Adunni a decade earlier, she was confident that this time would be different. She had brought backup weapons and a foolproof plan to ensure that no one would survive to expose her crimes. The irony of using the same location was too perfect to resist. But Adunni had chosen this location for different reasons entirely. This beach was where her mother had taught her to swim, where her father had told her stories about building business empires, and where she had learned the most important lesson of her life. Sometimes you have to let people think they've won before you reveal the true scope of your victory. "You're punctual," Folklore called out as a figure emerged from the shadows. "I have to admit, I'm impressed that you survived. It shows more strength than I gave you credit for." 10 years of swimming lessons will do that," Adunni replied, stepping into the moonlight. "Though I have to thank you for the motivation. Nothing teaches you to survive quite like someone trying to murder you." Folklore gestured, and 3 men emerged from hiding spots along the beach. This time, she had taken no chances. "I won't make the same mistake twice. This time, there won't be any miraculous escapes." "You're absolutely right," Adunni agreed. "This time will be very different." That's when the beach erupted with activity. Floodlights blazed alive, revealing that they were surrounded by law enforcement officers, journalists, and camera crews. Every word of their conversation had been broadcast live to news stations across Nigeria, and more importantly, had been recorded as evidence of the court cases that were already in motion. Folek's backup team found themselves surrounded and outnumbered by federal agents who had been tracking their movements for months. The perfect trap had indeed been sprung. But Folek was the prey, not the hunter. "You see," Adunni continued, her voice now audible to millions of viewers watching the live broadcast, "I spent 10 years learning how to be better than you, not just at business, not just at survival, but at playing the long game. While you thought you were hunting me, I was dismantling your entire operation piece by piece." The evidence that followed was overwhelming. Financial records showing the systematic murder of wealthy spouses, testimonies from surviving family members of previous victims, and most damning of all, recordings of Folek planning Segan's murder and confessing to poisoning Chief Alumide. But Adunni's masterpiece wasn't just the evidence. It was the timing. While Folek had been focused on this final confrontation, authorities had been simultaneously raiding her properties, arresting her associates, and freezing assets that had been stolen from murdered families across 3 countries. "The textile empire that belonged to my father," Adunni continued as Folek was handcuffed and read her rights. "It's been returned to its rightful ownership. The charitable foundations he established, they're being restored and expanded. And the victims of your network, they're finally getting justice." As Folek was led away, she turned back with one final question. "How did you know I would come here tonight?" Adunni smiled, the same expression her mother used to wear when teaching life lessons. "Because you're a predator, and predators always return to their hunting grounds. The difference is, this time the prey had evolved." The trial that followed became international news, exposing a criminal network that had operated across West Africa for over 15 years. Folek was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while her associates received sentences ranging from 25 years to life. But for Adunni, the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the foundation she established using the recovered assets from her father's empire. The Second Chance Foundation provided resources, protection, and legal support for families targeted by inheritance fraud, helping them fight back before they became victims. 6 months after the trial, Adunni stood in the renovated headquarters of her father's textile company, now operating as a social enterprise that employed hundreds of people from fishing villages like the one that had saved her life. Papa Emeka and his granddaughter Kemi were honored guests of the opening ceremony, recognized as the heroes who had made her survival and eventual victory possible. Segan, who had survived Folek's murder plot thanks to their collaboration, became her business partner and eventually something more. Their wedding took place on the same beach where Adunni had died and been reborn, transforming a place of trauma into a symbol of new beginnings. The final irony came when Adunni visited Folek in prison, not for revenge or gloating, but to offer something her stepmother had never shown anyone: mercy. She established an educational program for female prisoners, believing that even someone like Folek deserved a chance to understand destruction she had caused and perhaps find redemption. "Why?" Folek asked during that visit, genuinely confused by this act of grace from someone she had tried to destroy. Because, Adunni replied, my father taught me that true power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so beautiful that their hatred becomes irrelevant. As she left the prison that day, Adunni reflected on the journey that had brought her from the depths of Lagos Lagoon to this moment of triumph. The scared 19-year-old who had fallen into dark waters had indeed died that night. In her place had risen a woman who understood that the greatest revenge wasn't destruction. It was creation, healing, and the choice to break cycles of violence rather than perpetuate them. The textile empire flourished under her leadership. The foundation helped hundreds of families avoid becoming victims. And the beach where her nightmare began became a place where her children learned to swim, just as her mother had taught her decades ago. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's proving that their worst couldn't destroy your best. What an incredible journey from victim to victor. Did Adunni's choice to show mercy surprise you as much as it surprised me? Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of this epic tale of survival, justice, and redemption. If this story moved you, smash that like button. Subscribe for more amazing African stories of triumph over adversity. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the darkest moments, we can choose to build something beautiful. Until next time, keep believing in the power of resilience and the strength that comes from turning pain into purpose.